Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's special Small Biz Essential webinar. Today, we're talking about reframing your perspective and how to move forward when the unexpected happens. First things first, my name is Sierra Ladroma. I am the project manager for the Iowa Center's Women's Business Center. The Iowa Center's Women's Business Center is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. You will all receive an email after this event from my colleague, Ben Schultz, thanking you for attending today's session, information on how to connect to our speaker, as well as a form to complete. Please do us a big favor and take some time to fill this form out. This information allows us to continue providing free educational programming for small business owners in Iowa. Now go ahead and please take some time to look at the chat function on your Zoom screens so you can join the conversation by asking questions or adding comments. Today's featured guest is Jody Roan. Jody is a founding partner of Canary Consulting Group, a consulting firm that serves Central Iowa nonprofits. Jody has more than 20 years of experience in strategic planning, operations process improvement, and building a healthy workplace culture. She enjoys coaching nonprofit leaders and boards, helping them define and communicate priorities to their teams, maintain focus, and work effectively together. Jody is a natural problem solver and encourager who loves making a difference in her community. Jody, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. The screen is yours.
Absolutely, super excited to be here. So thank you, Sierra, for the introduction. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time telling you a little bit about myself. I'm actually a Southwest Iowa kid who graduated from a class of 30, count them 30, school classmates. That included the one foreign exchange student. After that, I spent time at Simpson College where I studied communications. And as I graduated, I was struck with the realization that that qualified me for everything because we all do need to communicate and then also nothing at the same time. So I actually started with a small agricultural company planning their international trade shows, which was a great experience. I got to see the world and it was wonderful. After a couple of years in trade shows, I actually moved into incentive travel with a small company here locally. And midway through that work, I loved sending groups of people on really fun and exciting travel programs. I ended up in their IT group, sort of by accident, but they were working on a huge rewrite of a system. And they said, well, we need someone from the business to go help the technology team understand how to build a system straight for us. So I did that for a handful of years until that software was developed. And at the end of that experience, they said, okay, help desk. And I knew that that was the moment in time at which I needed to say, no, it's time for something new. And at that point, I started my own first business called Simple Logic, and it was an IT consulting company. I had to quit my day job with absolutely no work in front of me because of contract arrangements that are similar around consultants. And so for that reason, I had to quit with no job and then start my company and then work to find clients from there. And believe it or not, it was a big leap forward, but it was really successful. And I spent about 10 to 12 years in that space. I, at that time, also started a second business, and it turns out that wasn't a business at all. It was a hobby. I love organizing things for people. So I did a little side hustle as a professional organizer and helping friends decorate their spaces and make lovely living spots. But it turns out that I never charged a single dollar for that work. I just kept doing it for friends over and over again. And so I soon realized that that was not a legit business. It was a pastime. And so I did that. Eventually, after several years of IT consulting, I realized that the decision-making process that I loved being a part of was really upfront of the IT process. It was when businesses made decisions about their strategy and their structure and how they were going to move forward and deliver their services. And that was the work that I really loved. So just over a year ago, I launched Canary Consulting Group with a desire to spend more time in that space than in the technology one. So I'll tell you a little bit about our business. I co-founded this with my business partner, Andy, who you'll see on the screen there. We'd met years and years ago on a consulting project, but then we stayed in contact over the next decade or so. And one of my clients that I had about 5 or 6 years ago had offered me a full-time position. And I said, thank you very much. I'm super flattered, but I don't really want to take full-time work. I loved consulting and wanted to stick with that. But at the time I said, but I have a friend and I'll introduce you to him. He might be perfect for that role. And so Andy joined the client that I was at as the full-time director of strategy and innovation, and then played a couple of other senior leadership roles there. The company we were with experienced a lot of transition and change around that time, and we decided that was the perfect time for us to go out on our own and start our own business, our own consulting practice. We have fabulous coworkers. You'll see them there, Carl and Bella, our little office pets, and we also have this gaggle of hens in the backyard of Andy's house where we work from, which always keeps things really interesting. We love what we do because we like seeing other people succeed. So Sierra originally asked me to lead this session because she works with a ton of entrepreneurs every day. And over time, she saw the same thing happen over and over again. When entrepreneurs encountered obstacles, they would, despite their best laid plans, end up feeling really stuck. And she saw that oftentimes they would just have a sense of tunnel vision. They're so busy and focused going after their goal that they just couldn't see a way out from whatever problem they were trying to solve. You might be here today because you identify with that a little bit and want some practical tips about how to get unstuck. So let's start a little bit talking about entrepreneurs in general. If you are a business owner, I already consider you to be one of the bravest people out there. By nature, you're creative. You saw a need in the marketplace and you figured out a way to solve that need. So that to me is a really creative thing because not everybody sees those opportunities. The next thing is that almost every entrepreneur I have ever met is completely action oriented. So that's how you took that great idea that you had and actually pressed forward to make it a reality because you're not afraid to take action. Otherwise, it just would have stayed a really neat idea that never got off the ground. And then the last thing is that I think most business owners, being honest with themselves, expect challenges. Every single day is an exercise in problem solving and adapting to whatever comes your way. But if you're a business owner, you also know that entrepreneurship is a super long, winding road. It's never linear. It's never a straight line. For example, I'll encourage you to think about your business before COVID. I would say that we were all, most of us anyway, headed down one particular road, and all of a sudden we were quickly forced to pivot. Even without COVID, though, there's a ton of examples where this sort of disruption happens all the time. And I think a thing happens when your business is your baby, it's yours, it was your idea to begin with. It sometimes can lead you down this road of catastrophic thinking where you think, oh no, this is not what I expected, and now everything is ruined. And even if you didn't dwell in that moment, you probably had those moments. And I think, the case though, is that there's almost always a workable option, even when that feels really, really unlikely. So I think there's a few very common places where entrepreneurs get stuck. The first one is imposter syndrome. I have a dear friend who's an executive coach, and she works almost exclusively with CEOs and executive directors of organizations. And I asked her once, what is the most common challenge the leaders that she coaches really contend with? And she said, hands down, no question, imposter syndrome. Everyone feels like they're faking it, and that this might be the exact one moment in time when everyone's going to figure that out. She said, that's even true for her. And she leads a coaching business where she helps people get around that all the time. It's not uncommon for us to feel like we're just faking it. And that's okay, because I think every day you fake it a little bit longer and you start to realize over time that you deserve to be there. The next one is that I oftentimes work with leaders who know what they want to achieve, but they have a very loose, if any, plan to get there. And so they're just dealing with the next thing that's in front of them over and over again, rather than having any sort of intentional plan. And I think sometimes that can cause tunnel vision to happen as well. The next bullet point I have there is product without a story. And this is funny because we work with a lot of relatively large clients. And oftentimes what happens is that they know what they want to offer into the world, but they don't have a compelling story that causes people to latch onto that. With the type of business I do, most of my networking involves being able to tell my elevator speech. And I have a confession to make. The first 1,000 times I did it, it was super rough. I knew what I offered, I knew what made me unique, but I just couldn't spit it out. And I think that some clarity around that story makes a huge difference in your ability to be successful. And I think the last thing that really has people encounter tunnel vision is just an obsession with success. So I think you have a front row seat as a business owner to everything that's happening. And it's really easy to be tremendously hard on yourself and to worry about what everyone is thinking, particularly, as you do hit those rough patches and you navigate things where you think to yourself, that didn't go as well as it could have been expected. I think the reality is that people are just not as focused on us as we believe they are. And it's important to really develop skills that help us recover and to bounce back from setbacks, because that's what's going to keep us moving forward. Okay, so what is tunnel vision? I found a definition and I thought it was really, really helpful and insightful. It's defective sight in which objects cannot be properly seen if not close to the center field of view. So in other words, if you're too close to things, it's really impossible to see it clearly sometimes. There's no magic solution for this, but there are a few powerful ways to counteract this. I think first is we have to stop believing that there is only one right answer to our problem. Sometimes we're so busy looking for that one right solution that we miss 1,000 other ways that we could move closer toward our goal. I think you have to ask yourself too, is your answer wrong or is it your question? I have a really wise friend who has been in senior leadership positions most of her career. And she once said to me something that was really insightful. She said, if I cannot find an answer to a problem, I have to reframe things and ask, am I even asking the right question? And so that's something to consider as well. And finally, I think it might also be time to think about unlocking your creativity and unleashing that. I know that sometimes seems a little daunting, so I'm going to start by sharing a few examples of business owners who did just that, because I think sometimes we can learn best by the examples of others. So we're going to talk through 4 different case studies here. The first one is really fun. Sierra shared this example with me because it reflects the journey of one business owner who's served by the Iowa Center. So when COVID hit, most of us really missed going to our favorite spot, our favorite bar, or our favorite restaurant. So one local entrepreneur found an opportunity that she thought might be really worth exploring. She wanted to offer adult beverage services selling daiquiris to go. And so as she moved forward with her business plan, it was time for her to place her first order for some branded cups that reflected the logo of her new business. And when she placed that order, the Amazon delivery person comes and she's so excited about that. And all of a sudden, when she unpacked it, she realized that she had ordered the wrong size of beverage containers. She was shooting for a 32-ounce good size beverage container. And instead, there were all these little tiny cups. They were just 16-ounce cups. And so Sierra shared that she came to her and said, I don't know what I'm going to do here. This is my first chance of laying out money to support my new business. I don't really have the funds to go and be able to place a second order. Maybe I should just give up. Maybe this wasn't a great idea to begin with. And Sierra, seeing that, sat down with her and did a little brainstorming and said, listen, we're not going to let your dreams be derailed by the fact that there was a little administrative error. And how often have most of us encountered a time where we goofed something up, whether it be in the ordering process or any number of other things. And so one of Sierra's ideas was, why don't we think about you switching to a 6-pack? instead of offering this really big beverage that you'd plan for, what if we think about offering things in a multi-variety 6-pack, and then think about what that means for people. They can place an order and then do a delivery to their friend's house, and then maybe go home and do a little virtual Zoom cocktail hour. And that was enough to get that business owner unstuck and back on the road again to achieving her goals, which was great. Another one is a client of ours is actually a local specialty goods store, and they are lucky enough to be in an area of Des Moines that has a huge amount of foot traffic, and so they're usually fairly busy. With COVID, they had to then dial things back a little bit and had to think about how they were going to serve their customers. And so they pivoted pretty quickly to a variety of different options. They allowed people to place orders in advance and pick things up. They started offering free local delivery. They always had a shipping option. And so they were able to respond pretty well to the COVID environment. But most of their business is actually done, and I think a lot of retailers fall into this, the vast majority of their annual business comes right before the holidays in that November, December timeframe. And so knowing that, they had worked ahead and really came up with their plan for how they were going to offer gift boxes and options for their customers, and they'd work with their suppliers. But guess what? They, like so many businesses, ran into supply chain issues at the 11th hour. And so that was not just with vendors they'd used in the past, but really any vendor. And so they weren't able to go out and purchase the items that they'd had on order. And all of a sudden they found that all of their holiday gift boxes couldn't be filled the way that they normally did. So they were stuck. And for a while they had tunnel vision too. They were thinking, okay, but I needed these things to make these gift boxes I'd planned to make. And in reality, they took stock of the situation and found that, wait, I do have other things on hand, just not the products I'd planned to. And so they were able to pivot very quickly, and they looked at what they had in stock. They looked at the gift boxes that they already had on hand, and they quickly created this whole entirely new unplanned series of gift boxes. But because they were able to use things that they already had on hand, they were able to just print new labels with new themes and then really start to promote that as though that had been their plan all along. And so I'm pleased to report that because they responded quickly and creatively to their problem, they actually surpassed their revenue targets and actually had the best year ever despite COVID, which is really crazy, but exciting for sure. My third example is another one that Sierra shared with me, and I thought this was a super wonderful example of how someone got unstuck in the middle of their own problem solving. So this particular organization had a leader that was passionate about helping incarcerated African American women have the skills and the support that they need to succeed after they left prison. And so originally this leader had developed a program assuming that all of her clientele would be prisons and government entities that she would enter into in a contract arrangement with and be able to provide those support services to those women. But she tried it several times and was unable to land one of those coveted competitive contracts. Probably because she didn't already have experience fulfilling those contracts. So you can probably see what a huge vicious circle that was. She needed experience she didn't have to win contracts. You know, she wasn't going to win those contracts until she had experience, which is a rough place to be in. She was really discouraged about that and reached out to Sierra for some help. And Sierra encouraged her to think through a different lens. She could still offer that same great program, but maybe her focus in terms of where she found people to participate in that program should shift a little bit. And so Sierra encouraged her to reach out to homeless shelters and other nonprofits serving women who were not currently incarcerated, but who may have been in and out of jail. And then partnering with those other nonprofits gave her the leverage she needed to actually start, because she had other groups that were willing to support her and fund some of that activity. So once she has a ton of success stories under her belt and some longevity, she'll be able to go back and enter into those contracts and bid for that work, being able to prove that she has experience and real life skills that have translated to a huge difference in the community. So that's super exciting. This last story that I share with you is actually really near and dear to my heart. because it's the story of Canary Consulting Group and my own tunnel vision moment. I don't think any of us are exempt from those. When we first launched, and we launched in October of 2019, we had a super clear picture of our ideal client. We knew exactly who we were going to market to. It was going to be the CEO or the executive team of a small to mid-sized company. And we define that as someone with employees, probably between about 50 and 300 employees, likely in a service industry. We've spent most of our careers working with businesses that don't sell a particular widget, but they offer a service of some sort. And we knew that's who we were going after as our clients. At the same time, we had made this decision about our own corporate philanthropy program. And we knew that as a really new business, we didn't have any money to donate or any funds to offer. So we decided that our corporate philanthropy program was going to include us finding a couple of small nonprofits a year. And we were going to offer some discounted hourly rates to them to be able to help them with whatever challenges they were facing, because we knew that some nonprofits have a very similar set of challenges as for-profit clients, just their funding is different. And so we had decided to do that. And we'd actually reached out to a couple local nonprofits and said, hey, we can help you with things like our strategic planning. An important thing to know about us is that Andy and I, we're both well into our careers. That's a nice way of saying we're both kind of old and we have a lot of tenure. And we have each had a really winding career trajectory. And so if you look at our career paths, they don't even necessarily make a ton of logical sense. We just have had opportunities to work with a lot of different people and a lot of different teams. And we had done a ton of things like strategic planning. So we can help businesses, build a plan. We'd done a lot of organizational design and helped organizations really completely pivot and organize themselves totally differently than they did before. We both had experience with process improvement. And so we knew how to sit down and work on, okay, both a process framework and also like you have something that you want to make more efficient and more repeatable. We'll help you document what that process is and roll it out to your team so that way they're all doing things the same way. We'd spent years in the project space, and so we were really familiar with project planning and project management and helping project teams deliver on that. We did business transformation projects, which is a really nice way of saying we help rescue broken things, which is something that we do quite a lot. And so, lots of businesses have problems with a particular area or a particular team, and they need help understanding, first of all, what's the root cause of that and how do we get out of it? Organizational health. We had spent a lot of time with different companies helping them become healthier, because there's nothing that derails a company's plans faster than having a team that's not engaged and not on board. We'd helped small entrepreneurs launch their companies. We did some services pretty similar to some of the things that the Iowa Center offers, particularly for people moving into consulting work that had never done that before. And we had a little launch kit that you could buy, and we'd help mentor you and help you work through all of those first stages of planning and launch. For newly launched organizations, we did vision and mission and values development work, which is so fun, and I really love that. And then finally, we offered leadership coaching. So that's a long list. The good news is we actually have experience with all of that, and we really enjoy doing all of those things. But, when we first started, we didn't leap into this particular consulting practice having a set of clients we developed already. We were going to do that on the fly because we're brave and foolish and just assumed that because it's always worked in the past, we could. And COVID really put a wrench into our plans because that started and lockdown started about 3.5 months after we launched. So we were just beginning to be able to tell our story to a ton of people. And we realized that the type of work we do is almost always sold through networking. People don't want to hire strangers to look under the covers and see all of their dirty laundry about what's not going well in their company and help them move forward. They almost always do it based on referral from someone else. And so we did a ton of that sort of networking in our early stages. But what we found is that when we did get a chance to connect with someone, our story was really disjointed because that list is so incredibly long. So we decided after probably 3 or 4 months in business that we needed to get really serious about solving one particular problem for our business. We were going to try to decide in our first year of operations what work we loved the most. And then we would really focus on that in our marketing messaging. So even though we might offer some other services, if we decide that strategic planning and executive coaching is where we wanted to spend time, we would do that. And that would help us tell our story a little bit better. We tried it for months, and it really we kept coming back to it. It felt like our unsolvable problem. Guys, we just couldn't get it together. Our elevator speech was still awful because it was just entirely too long. And we weren't really sure who we wanted to be when we grew up. So months went by and we were struggling with it, but we had a handful of clients, and so we were happy to be doing that work, but we were really concerned about our ability to grow. And we ended up connecting with a local networking group. And this was a group of nonprofit consultants who served exclusively the nonprofit community. And so out of that kind of referral networking group, we ended up finding a couple of nonprofit clients, a couple more than we had intended with our offer of reduced price services. As we gained more and more nonprofit clients, we became better networked in that space, and we started getting calls from a ton of different nonprofits. And we found that we loved that work, and it had meaning, and so made us feel like we were making a difference. And eventually we kind of started dreading the work we did with our nonprofit clients because we just couldn't get quite as excited about the mission. So remember before when I said that we have to think about whether it's our answer that's wrong or it's our question? In our case, it was very much our question. We kept asking the wrong question. Which limited set of services should we provide? But to thrive, we didn't really need to change what we offered. We needed to pinpoint who we were offering it to. And so starting in December, just a little while ago here, we made the decision to focus solely on our nonprofit clients. And to be clear, this decision is so new. If you go to our website, it doesn't even reflect it yet. But as of the start of March, we have more work in our pipeline now than we did for all of last year. If we close all of the business with the clients that we're working with right now, we will already double last year's revenue, because we have clarity around who we serve. And then we can talk from there about some of the common challenges that they solve. So that's my own story about how things went as we discovered we were answering the wrong question. So for us, that was a way to get creative. And we're going to spend some time talking now about how you actually go about being creative in business. First, I think it's important for us to focus on some myths about creativity. The first one is that creativity isn't my job. So I think sometimes we tend to think that creatives are the artists and the writers and the musicians and the graphic designers and the writers. But I would encourage you to think differently about that. Again, I think you're already one of the most creative people around because you created a brand. You saw an opportunity and you figured out how to problem solve. And sometimes what happens in business is if we decide that creativity is a certain person's job, then that absolves everyone else from needing to be creative. So I think I mentioned before that my business partner was hired into that one of my former clients as the director of strategy and innovation. And you want to know what that did? There was an unintended side effect. It communicated to everyone that innovation was Andy's job, not theirs. And so I think it's important to remember that that's really a shared responsibility and that everyone on your team can be creative, even if that's just creative in how they serve your customers. The next thing that we need to remember is that creativity is not something that we're born with. Evidence shows that creativity is not a trait inherited in your genes. It's not in your DNA. People who have confidence in themselves and work the hardest on a problem are usually the ones most likely to solve it. The same myth that I think many of us have is that creativity will come to us in this giant flash of insight. We'll have a eureka moment and then we will solve it. It'll be perfect. But I think what's important to remember is that new ideas and insights might seem like they come in a flash, but they usually happen actually after many cycles of imagining, reimagining, playing around with your ideas, reflecting on them, sharing them with others, having others provide insight. And eventually, after many iterations and false starts, that's when we have our creative moment, not as one single moment, but as the culmination of a lot of different conversations leading to that point. And I think the last myth we should think about is that sometimes creativity and innovation are used interchangeably. They are complementary and they do rely on each other, but they're not really the same thing. Creativity is our cognitive ability to find connections and rules and patterns that help us find new and original ideas. Innovation, on the other hand, is about taking those ideas that you've found through creativity and turning them into reality by introducing new, feasible, and useful products or services or business models or whatever it is that you do for a living. Okay, so we've explored a few myths about creativity. Another thing we need to think about is whether or not we've developed a set of habits that then crush creativity. We've already talked about believing that there's only one answer. In my experience, there's just 1,000 ways to get to where we're going, and we need to be open to that and like take down our ability to be afraid to explore new things. I think another thing that oftentimes happens is that we're happy with choosing the very first solution that we see. Instead of trying to go through a series of solutions and then choosing the best one, sometimes if we come across something that, well, okay, that'll get me close enough, we pick that automatically and then stop thinking about it, which sometimes limits our ability to find other options. I also see a lot of business owners that have identities that are wrapped up into being really action oriented, which is fabulous. I mean, the world goes by with that sort of thing. But sometimes you have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of not having the answer. And that can be really hard to do. If you're going a million miles an hour, you may just miss the lesson that you're needing to learn. And then I think fear of failure too might just put you on the path of doing what you've always done before. And one of my mentors said something to me years ago that really stuck with me. She said, fail quickly and fail often. And that's her philosophy in general with every type of business problem she solves. She not only expects that there might be a possibility of failure, she like hurdles herself full speed toward it because you know, she knows that the best way to rule out bad ideas is to find them, to try them, and then to rule them out and keep moving down the road. She's also one of the bravest people I know because she never equates screwing up with losing everything. She doesn't see those two things as happening. So one last parting thought about habits that crush creativity. If you find yourself in negative thought patterns where you kind of tamper down your own ability to take risks and to be creative, you may accidentally also be introducing that same negative attitude to your team. Our consulting practice actually spends a huge amount of time with people who inadvertently and with no intentionality behind it, created a culture that wasn't very purposeful. It just, culture is there, whether you define it or not, and it oftentimes just evolves. And so they find then that if they're squashing down people's creativity and their ideas and their ability to share what they're learning, it's really hard to keep people engaged and enthusiastic about working there. It's a really hard thing to unwind. So as you evaluate your own bias toward creativity, you'll also want to think about whether you're encouraging that or discouraging that from your team and the problems they're trying to solve together. Okay, so when we don't immediately land on the best solution, it's really common to start feeling like your feelings are facts. They aren't, they're feelings. And it's easy to struggle with distorted thinking. And so we're going to talk about a few examples of that. So for example, all or nothing thinking is seeing situations in absolute terms. There's black, there's white, there's no gray, and that's usually not accurate. Another thing is blaming. We have a client who works with an outside governmental entity who kind of makes the rules for them. And oftentimes, rather than looking into their own team and creatively looking toward a problem, they oftentimes can pinpoint that external boss, if you will, as being the bully that makes them do things that they don't want to do, or that causes limitations in their business. And so I think they invest a lot of time and energy into blaming someone else rather than taking responsibility for their own actions and how they're going to be creative in response. Another one is catastrophic thinking. And so I think some people are just more prone to this by nature. So that's always imagining the worst thing that can possibly happen and then assuming that that will indeed come true. Another type of distorted thinking is discounting the positive. So that happens when people take in a huge amount of information about what's going good and bad and all sorts of things. But then they take every positive and they set that to the side and say, yeah, okay, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about this one particular case where I didn't succeed or where I encountered failure, and really focusing on that. The mental filters one is very similar to that. It's focusing only on the negatives and never on the positives. And the last one is should statements. Always feeling like you've failed to live up to expectations about what you should do in a situation. I heard one speaker say once, don't should all over yourself. And it's one of my favorite quotes because it's so true. I have a tendency to do that. I'm an Enneagram 1. And so I'm always focused on doing the right thing all of the time. And sometimes I fixate a little bit too much on what I think I should be doing rather than the situation at hand. All right, so how do we counter that? If there are many types of distorted thinking, hopefully there are many types of ways to reframe that. Cognitive reframing is a psychological technique that really consists of identifying and then changing the situations and experiences and emotions and how they're viewed. Cognitive reframing is the process in which situations or thoughts are then challenged and then changed. So I wanted to provide just a handful of examples of ways to reframe your emotions. First of all, I think you need to start with validating your feelings. Sometimes when you don't take time to feel them, they can actually bubble up and cause more harm than good. And so I have a friend named Emily, and she is the owner of a great local business called Blue Chair Blessing. And she creates beautiful artwork and sells them to people in the community and all over the country. And one time she said to me, girl, you got to feel your feelings and then get over your bad self. And I come back to that time and time again, because what she gave me permission to do is go ahead and dwell, but then pick how long you're going to do that. And so for me, sometimes that makes me say, okay, for the rest of today, I'm just going to go ahead and feel discouraged about whatever. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to pick ourselves back up and we're going to go on and solve the problem. And so I time box that sometimes. And so it sounds silly, but it actually works. The next one is examining the evidence. Sometimes you need to look at what's truly happening so you can decide if your interpretation of a situation is even accurate. I think it can be really easy to assume or to project how you think other people are thinking and feeling and how they're going to react. If you're the kind of person that has conversations with yourself in the shower where you like imagine what the other person's going to say, you might be a victim of this particular one. And so I think what's important to do is to take a step back from that and really look at the evidence of what people actually said and what they actually did, not your projection of what you imagine is happening on the inside of their mind. The next one is get curious. And this is amongst my very favorites because curiosity is one of Canary Consulting Group's core values. And so I think cognitive reframing teaches us to ask ourselves, is there a different way that I should be looking at this situation? Are there other reasons this could have happened than what I expected? And so I encourage you to really dig in and get curious about a situation rather than just reacting to it. The next one, tapping into your support system, is really important. And if you don't feel like you have one as a business owner, I think it's important to find that. I mean, you probably have family and friends that are encouraging to you, but they can't necessarily understand what it feels like to put your kind of life on the line to start a business and to solve the challenges that are in front of you all the time. A few different ways to do that are to find a mentor. I think that's a really important idea that gives you someone that you can talk to who's been there before and that you can bounce ideas off of. Sometimes that might be a coach of some sort. So that might be a shorter term arrangement where you're actually paying someone to be your coach. It can also be just someone that you really, really trust. I'm lucky. For me, that person is my business partner, and he can be empathetic and he can hear me. And sometimes he can say, and now it's time to get over that. And here's what we're going to do. And that is so helpful to me. Another group that's important to us is that nonprofit group that I talked about. We have this little business networking group, and we all sell different things. I mean, there's people in that group that provide marketing solutions or graphic design or grant writing or a number of different things, but we're all the same kind of small business owner. And so when we get stumped or don't know how to encounter a situation and succeed in it, we can call each other and say, hey, have you ever like, tell me more about how you respond to proposals, things like that. So that's been really helpful to us. I think the next one is changing lanes. And that to me means getting away for a minute. And sometimes you're wallowing in the middle of what it is you're trying to do in your business day is not your best solution. It's actually to walk away from it for a bit. And so it might be time to go enjoy a hobby. Sometimes I think helping someone else solve their problem, even if it's just, bringing a meal to a family with a new baby or something like that, helps us reframe because we're focused on someone other than ourselves. Volunteering, going for a walk, you probably have your set of things that you like to fall back to that's energizing and life-giving to you. Sometimes changing lanes can help you solve the problem that previously seemed unsolvable. And I think the last one is really around exercising compassion. I would imagine that everyone listening today is probably really wonderful about exercising compassion to others, but sometimes it is much harder to exercise compassion for ourselves. And so, I encourage you to realize, you're not a failure. Your plan isn't doomed. You're just a really smart person who's gotten a little stuck. Okay, the next one, and I'll go quickly on this. If you're trying to solve a problem, brainstorming is a great way to get there. And that's really about choosing the quantity of ideas over the quality, and then beginning to whittle those down a little bit. And so have this here, but I think most of us have probably effectively brainstormed at some point. If that's new to you, just make sure you get the right people in the room, that you throw out every idea under the sun first. You're really focusing on quantity, not quality. And then you kind of start to combine and organize those ideas. What you're probably seeing at that point are some common themes. And then don't be afraid to refine those ideas and play around with it. And finally, I'll go back to my friend's advice. Try it out, pilot something, try it, fail, and then learn from that and move forward. This last slide in this section, I thought this was a really cool idea. I did not come up with it myself. I stole it from somewhere else. And it was just, I think, a really affirming idea around ideation. When you're trying to create something new, particularly I think about like if we're developing products or something like that in our business, it's often, I think, challenging because we believe we have to have this entirely new idea that has never existed in the history of mankind. But in reality, oftentimes the best ideas are just retooled and repurposed ideas from somewhere else. So this scamper thing, and I encourage you to Google it later and to learn a little bit more about it, is the idea of taking something that already exists and then just finding a way to improve on it incrementally. And sometimes that is enough to make all the progress you need. I just thought it was a very, very cool trick and tip, and I wanted to share that with you today. All right, so if you're still stuck, and sometimes we are, and that's okay. What I'll encourage us to do is to really take a moment, step back, and go to the basics. I need to make a little confession. As I did research into creativity and ways we can solve our problems, sometimes those ideas that popped out seemed a little trite to me, and sometimes a little impractical. So I started thinking about where I find comfort when a problem seems really big and hairy. And what I discovered is that sometimes my best leap forward is to actually take a quick moment and look back at the things that I know to be 100% true. So a foundational question is, who are you? Take a step back and remember who you are. Maybe when you first launched, you took some time to define your vision, mission, and values. If you didn't, that's okay. I just encourage you to think back. Vision. What is the reason for you existing? What sort of all-encompassing future are you working toward? Vision really paints a picture of what could be and will be if you accomplish 100% your purpose, even the things that seem too bold or too scary right now. A mission really talks about the unique and specific calling for an organization. It's the driving force for your decision making around strategic planning and your budgeting and your priorities. It's rooted in your values, and it helps us move forward toward vision fulfillment. And finally, values are just really the foundational pillars of an organization. They represent who you are. They're really your DNA. They're not even determined. You don't go off and decide, well, what are my values going to be? You discover those things because they're inherent to you and the way you run your business. So even if you haven't defined these in the past, I think it's important to pause and just ask the questions: why did I start this business to begin with? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And, can I reflect on that and then solve my problem in a way that satisfies those things? The next one is making sure that you have a really good sense of what it is you offer. And I mentioned before that oftentimes even large companies are a little fuzzy about this. And sometimes that means that they're swept into the path of least resistance instead of being intentional about that. And then they start to find that they then align their staff and their budget and their priorities around things they don't even actually want to be selling, which sounds crazy, but it's actually true. And sometimes they don't even make money at it because it's really hard to deliver that product or service. So again, take a step back. What is it that I'm offering? And what does that say about it? What are the features of that? Why is that important? Who loves that particular product? The price, is my product a premium product or a bargain product? How do I make money off of this? What are the best ways for me to promote that product in the marketplace? Who do I tell my story to? How do I know if that's effective? And then finally, how will I connect with my buyer? For physical products, that might be a physical location, but for services, how do you deliver them? And so taking a step back sometimes and getting really clear on these again can help you reframe your problem as you move forward. Another one is knowing your customer. I think that's so super important. I think, one of the things that helped us most recently is defining or redefining our ideal customer. And that in and of itself can bring really good clarity to the situation. I think it's important to reach out to them regularly and have some conversations, and that can be through survey tools or just chatting in person or whatever the case may be. It might be your engagement on social media, but really understanding who your customer is and making sure that you have a common voice that you use to engage them all the time. And then finally, I wouldn't be a good strategy consultant if I didn't finish up with a reminder about the importance of having a plan. For the first couple of decades of my career, I will admit that every time someone talked about strategic planning, I broke out in hives and I was like, no, I'm not really smart. I don't know what that is. And the funny thing is we work with clients all the time. And guess what? No one knows what that is. And so here's how I demystify that for people. And all it means, strategy just is a look at what you're going to do. You got to figure that out. Where are you headed? And then you need to figure out how you're going to actually do it. And then step 3, you go and do those things. But what's most important, I think, sometimes is deciding what you're not going to do. Oftentimes we work with businesses that will say, okay, tell us about last year's strategic plan. And they'll say there were 47 projects on it. Well, how many did you get done? 2. So a lot of strategy is about deciding what work you won't be doing and then moving from there. And so again, for me, it's really helpful sometimes when I'm trying to creatively problem solve, going back to the basics, really remembering who I am and what I offer, sometimes helps give me the type of clarity I need to move forward. All right, so we've covered a ton of ground today. I know I went a little further on time, Sierra, than we had expected, but hopefully you found it helpful. Tunnel vision is not at all a unique problem. I think every business owner gets trapped in it at some point. And so here's just a quick parting reminder. The more you stop being afraid of screwing up, the more creative you'll become, and you'll reframe your challenges in ways that leave you braver. I love a quote by Maya Angelou who said, "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have." So thank you so much for joining me today. And Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Jody, thank you so much for that. I was taking some notes and I just have some questions before we say goodbye.
Yeah.
I love the quote that one of your mentors says, fail quickly and fail often. And I also love the idea of reframing your emotions. Could you share with entrepreneurs an example of how to reframe your emotion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, it's a hard one too. I'm trying to think back to something that's happened recently. I think for me, I had a client who was working through the prospect of a potential merger, and they were moving forward. And so, of course, the work that I was doing was really to move that work forward to get them prepared and ready to merge. And as time went on, we started to realize that this might not be in everyone's best interest. And so it was really easy for me to kind of focus on the part that, oh, have I not led them down the right path? Have I not forced the right conversations to happen? And then wait a minute, like now all of a sudden I'm focused on if this work doesn't happen and I'm not involved in that, what am I going to need to do to find a new client to make up for that lost revenue? And so I was focusing on really all of the wrong things. And I think for me, I was able to reframe that conversation to say, I'm here as a guide to help them come up with the best possible answer to their question. Should we move forward and merge? And it's okay that the answer might be no. And I need to be a support in that. And as a result, from looking at that through a different lens of just how can I be someone that can be in their confidence and help them work through the messy emotions of where they're at, that was a better problem to solve. And so as a result, I think that client said, hey, no matter what happens with this, even if this falls apart completely, we want to bring you in to support us in whatever's next, whether it's this work or something else. And so it ended up great.
Thank you for sharing that. So one more question. I also agree that mentorship is key, really in any field and anything that you're trying to take on and grow. How do you what are some steps that entrepreneurs can take to find a mentor?
I think part of it is just looking in the community around you and people that you've known to say who's doing things that are really cool. And, might they be able to enter into a relationship with me that I can learn more about how they reached that maturity. So I always look at people who are doing things I don't believe that I'm capable of doing. And, and that seems a little bit scary, but I think most mentorship arrangements really start with a cup of coffee. So don't be afraid to go out and spend time with people and ask them, because one thing, when Andy and I first started, we were so scared about the idea of networking with potential clients. We were just like, oh no, I don't know, that seems like selling yourself. They're going to think it's a waste of time. The reality is people love to tell their story and they love to hear your story. Those two things are absolutely true. So if you find people that you admire and you want to know more about how they see the world, I would start informally, just asking them to coffee, asking them to lunch, having some conversations with them. And if you really gel and hit it off, I think most people are delighted if someone asks them to provide some mentorship to them.
So is it really as forward as, will you be my mentor?
Yeah, I think absolutely. At some point you get to that point. I had somebody that reached out to me once and said, would you be my mentor? And I thought, oh goodness, how am I qualified for that? What are you talking about? I didn't even know you saw me that way. That's crazy. So yeah, I've done the same and reached out to people that I respect a lot and love their perspective and just say, hey, can we formalize this a little bit? Let's just put it on our calendar. Can we spend time together once a month? And I'll tell you where I'm at on things and what I'm struggling with. And I just would love your perspective. So I think it's okay to ask.
Beautiful. Yeah, I agree too. Okay. Do you have any last final words before we say goodbye?
Just thank you so much for letting me spend time with you today.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us, for your energy and your expertise on this subject. Again, anyone who has registered will get your contact information. So hopefully, and please do reach out, make that connection, network, do whatever it is to support you. And Jody, have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
again.
much. Bye.
Bye.